evening, you're going to be interviewing the entrepreneurs who are coming in this evening. But I thought maybe what we should do to just set a little bit of context for the audience is maybe what we should explore is the value of innovation and entrepreneurship to governments, the city, and big business.
Absolutely. Well, no, it's great as always to be asking the questions as a politician instead of getting grilled. So thank you very much, Ashley. I know your usual audience is CNN, among other big channels. So it's really fantastic to have you, and we'll be joined a little bit later by others who really are defining, I suppose, the way we see social or government challenges and taking entrepreneurship to drive those solutions, and often doing that not just through innovation in government, but really outside the existing confines and structures. And it certainly earned you a list on the Forbes top 30 among a whole bunch of other accolades and being profiled and documented on CNN. So in the area of healthcare specifically, 4 Rand for malaria test kit, making this accessible to millions of people, if not opening up to billions, and I think a whole lot of other innovations that you've had as a scientist as well as an entrepreneur. And I think that's quite an important theme to explore, given seeing how you find solutions to things where often we will say, well, it can only be this person's problem to solve. Entrepreneurs are finding these solutions. So for you, first of all, do you see yourself as an entrepreneur? I suppose that's the question.
Yes, I do. I see myself as an entrepreneur with a passion of innovating in Africa. One of the biggest challenges we have is competing against first world countries.
Right.
And I feel the only way we can do that is to innovate, is to do our own research.
Right.
And that's a challenge on its own.
And you very much stayed put and focused here, as opposed to going to some of the bigger scientific research institutes, all around the world, the Ivy Leagues. What have the reasons been behind that? Because some people say you can't have a platform for success from South Africa, or at least it's harder, you should go abroad for a while. You clearly haven't done that. What's the motivation? The
industry I'm in is diagnostics, so the biggest market to me is Africa.
Sure.
It makes sense for me to manufacture in Africa. Mm-hmm. The products we manufacture, people don't want these products, they need it, and it's socially impacting. So it makes sense to do everything from here. I agree with you. If you can do it in Africa, then it should be easier to be successful in the first world country.
Right. And do you think barriers to entry in terms of product testing and the like are perhaps easier in some ways here than other markets like the United States?
Yeah, for sure. We've got a bigger sample pool.
Right.
We've got a high HIV positive rate in South Africa, so we've got more HIV blood samples here. Sure. Malaria as well. Malaria is big in Africa, so it makes sense to operate in my industry in Africa.
Fantastic. And you initially went in studying, like most of us do, with a specific goal or aim in mind, and then you realized, your ability as a scientist to have an impact through commerce and through enterprise was there, or perhaps you were shooting in the dark. I mean, what was that process between both having a professional skill, studying for something, and realizing that you weren't just going to be someone who's another number in a corporation or a government? You were going to define this industry.
Yeah. Afraid of studying further and being overqualified because there's no jobs in the industry.
Sure.
And I thought to myself, that needs to change. There's obviously a gap in this market if there's no jobs for qualified people.
Yeah.
Then I thought, I'm 24 years old. The only way I can do this, and a barrier is also being my age, is to innovate and to look at sciences that is quite difficult to implement. The science we're doing, you can't study for this. It's a combination of physics, biochemistry, material science, and choosing electives to get this right at university is challenging. So it's empirical science where you have to actually do the work, shotgun approach, and see if you can develop intellectual property.
Mm-hmm. And when you went into university, did you see yourself doing this and doing it through business or through entrepreneurship? Because some people might go into it and say, I'm going to do this, but within the confines of a research lab or a large institution. I mean, you went solo. Was that always part of the plan?
I looked at how can I piggyback off infrastructure.
Right.
For me, it was important to look at internships. Fortunately, when I completed my studies, there was an internship hosted by K Biotech, which is now absorbed into TIA.
Right.
And I joined this internship, and the whole idea was to boost the biotech space.
Sure.
So fortunately for me, I was one of the 13 selected, and unfortunately this internship only ran once, never again. So I wouldn't have been in business today if government didn't get involved and to cushion the risk for us.
Right. And so there are programmatic approaches, things that can be done without stifling, in essence, the innovation, the ability for you to do business, for you to create innovation. How do you specifically see the role of perhaps mentors, so to speak, people who've been able to sit with you and guide you? Did you find in South Africa there were older individuals, more experienced, who were willing to give back? And how did you approach finding a mentor, if that was the route you took?
Yeah, that was quite important for me. My first mentor was at university, one of our lecturers, and he saw a lot of potential in me in terms of the questions I asked in class, and he played a big part in me actually going into business.
Sure.
My consultant as well, when I was at Cape Biotech doing the internship, they placed a consultant in our business.
Right.
And yeah, he saw value and he became my mentor and is now a shareholder in the business.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
How did you go about, let's say, monetizing this? I mean, starting a business, it's the registration process, and then it's the whole getting funds, doing due diligence. You know, you were a scientist, so of course I don't know if maybe you had time to do the MBA part at the same time, but how did you get through all of that? Did you bring key people into the company who could take care of that? Was it something you partnered with others to do, maybe give an equity stake to those handling it? What was the business model?
My business model was always to organically grow the business. I looked at opportunities in the diagnostic space. When I started my business, fortunately there was a problem, but unfortunately it was a massive problem, methamphetamine. Methamphetamine was a big problem in Cape Town. And even before I developed the test, I looked at where I could source a cheap methamphetamine test from. Fortunately, I found a company. I then thought, what is the best way of getting this into the market? There's nothing like this in the market. Look at the biggest pharmacy group. I then approached Alpha Farm Pharmacies, begged them for 10 minutes in a meeting they had. And for me, it was make or break that 10 minutes. So I had to come with graphical pictures of before and after, and statistics, etc. And also, I had to, promote corporate social investment from their side.
Sure.
So I offered them a methamphetamine test, branded under the Alpha Farm brand. And when I left the meeting, they gave me a national contract. And that, of course, opened up the door. So now it was a matter of negotiating credit terms. I didn't have a lot of money, so I had to get paid before I pay.
Sure.
So I actually used the contract and I leveraged trading terms with my supplier.
Fantastic.
And I organically grew the business. I then decided to go back to my old university and asked them for lab space.
Right.
And fortunately, I got lab space and they didn't charge me. So I developed my own methods to make a methamphetamine test. And I developed my own methamphetamine test and replaced the imported product with my own. So I organically grew the business over 8 years.
And this made a significant impact in terms of tackling the issue of drug abuse across the Cape Flats.
Yeah.
And I certainly remember your name coming up in a meeting at a government level that was addressing the whole, crisis really around drug abuse. And how you, through this enterprising solution, were able to come forward and find a way to address a massive issue, right here on our back door. One thing I want to go back to is you mentioned, you got up and you went to a massive pharmaceutical company. I mean, I don't know how exactly one just does that. Obviously, there's an art to deciding, here's somebody I want to approach. Yes, it's the CEO I may want to see. How do you start that from walking in off the pavement, so to speak? Were there networks, were there existing contacts, and how did you develop those in the first place?
It took me a year to get a meeting with him. So it was actually being persistent and begging.
Right.
Sending emails, trying to get the right person. And fortunately, they were in Cape Town, and all the stakeholders, the key stakeholders, they were in a meeting. And they gave me a 10-minute slot in their lunch. Amazing. So those who sat around were the ones who actually said, listen, we have to take this serious.
Right.
Barrier being my age 24. I had to look at how can I actually build my own personal profile. I looked at competitions. I looked at what is available in South Africa. And South African breweries, amazingly, they focus a lot on enterprise development and innovation, etc. And I focused on that. And with that, besides money you win to invest in your business, they provide media as well. And with the media, obviously, you build your profile.
Amazing. And so the sort of interventions that private sector companies are making, you mentioned SAB, you've got Isuzu here helping make this possible at MEDO, they really are incredibly valuable. And sometimes people might say, well, they're just done in the name of CSI, but really in the good examples there's a strong business case, and what they're doing is empowering people who are going on to make a big difference. What do you think is perhaps the most understood misunderstood aspect of being an entrepreneur? When you speak to people, be they in these private sector companies or in government or in your friends group, what do people perhaps not get about entrepreneurship that you think is just a common misunderstanding?
In my experience, as your business grows, your cash flow becomes worse.
Right.
So the first thing when you build some sort of profile and your brand gets out there, you get a lot of calls for corporate social investment from your side. So it's challenging, you know, you need to give back. How do you give back? But you need to invest in your business as well. And that's not organic growth. Obviously, there comes a time when you have to choose when I'm going to get investors on board. Sure. Now, corporate social investment is important to do, but it, as you know, it's a tax saving as well. So what SAR's done also now in my field, when you do research and development, you get 150% tax deductible rebate. So it makes sense for companies to look at corporate social investment strategies also.
And to focus on those clear benefits. So the impact of policy is very much there in the government arena. And I think that's one of the important things about this particular show and this platform is there is an interaction for entrepreneurs like you out there in the real world to present perhaps some of the things that government can do, commend what's being done right, but also encourage and push what can be done to improve this environment even more. I'm going to ask you to wait right where you are just for a minute and invite someone who you may have seen in CNA exclusive books on the cover of Forbes magazine. Rapelang Rabana is joining us. Welcome, Rapelang. And from healthcare over to education, one of the other massive social challenges, again being driven through entrepreneurship to find a solution. You have founded not just one, but several successful enterprises. But of course, Rekindle is a big one. And there's something that struck me in reading your story, and I wondered if you can correct me on the analogy. From a government perspective, you know, 20, 30 years ago, the crisis in Africa was telecoms and fixed lines and how we're going to ensure that Africa is connected. And all of a sudden, mobile came through and we became the most connected continent in the world by mobile phone usage. In a sense, it seems to me, certainly the way the media has covered it, is you're helping revolutionize that, but in education. So as we ask all these questions around schooling and us catching up, you're saying, hold on, let's go beyond catch up. Let's use technology and leapfrog and put this continent ahead of the pack. Maybe if you could speak to that.
Sure, thank you very much for that introduction, Gareth. My whole sort of life has really been around mobile and internet technology and how we use it to solve a range of problems. My first business was in telecoms and voice over IP software, and now applying that same idea of mobile and internet and how we use it to solve learning and technology challenges. So I think the mobile phone has done the first step of leapfrogging the connectivity and communication gap. Now we need to go to the next level and ask ourselves, how do we apply what we can do on mobile phones to a broad range of industries. We've seen some nice things happening in retail and e-commerce platforms becoming more popular. We've seen a lot of things in financial services and the M-Pesas and things like that. But it actually will affect many other industries, and it's upon us to actually start asking ourselves, how do we create those digital learning experiences on mobile devices that can actually transform how we develop skills. And my real passion now with Rekindle Learning is how we use technology to learn more efficiently and assimilate knowledge faster than we traditionally would have done, and ensure that we can build competency in ways that are faster than as what has been done historically. Because if you think about the African continent and the huge youth dividend, we need to find a way to build those skills faster than we have before. We can't keep learning in the same linear way we used to learn if we ever hope to be a global leader as a continent. And this is where, for me, technology needs to fill that gap, because we need to leapfrog the way we learn. And to give you a sort of a simple analogy of the kinds of things that we do is that if you land in a city today, like Istanbul, and you don't know where you're going, but you've got an address and you can be given a GPS, and if you punch in the address into that GPS, you would actually be expertly navigated to where you need to go. You haven't been trained, you haven't learned a map on Istanbul, but you've got an intelligent guide that can get you to where you need to go. And you've essentially leapfrog a learning process that traditionally would have required a lot more time to figure out. So using that same kind of analogy and intelligence, we can capture in organizations and big companies that same kind of business complexity, so that someone can be able to go into a sales role or a compliance and regulatory role and be able to use some kind of virtual coach or virtual advisor that can navigate you through an organization's products or regulations or processes and things like that. And for me, that becomes powerful because often young people are unattractive for employment because it takes them so long to become competent. Even if you have a degree, you still need years and years of practice to really be able to add value to an organization. But what if now expertise can be harnessed into these kind of technologies? Then expertise can be more widely distributed, and it doesn't have to be housed within the person with that 25 years of experience. And that to me is one example of how we get and how we use technology to empower young people to be able to add more value and be more productive in workplaces far quicker than we did before. So I hope that covers the question that you were asking.
Absolutely, and if there are any more investors, I'm sure they're still knocking. I want to come for a second to a question we touched on earlier, and that's the interface between your enterprise and government, or let's say government policy. I know you give many talks all around the world annually, and I heard you at UCT last year, I think along with one or two others in this room, and one of the things that you mentioned is that the view of a business as needing to do more than just make profit is often erroneous, because your business, by virtue of making profit, is a great indicator in and of itself that you are serving the social good in education. And yet often there is pushback, and some people even argue within government, no one who makes a profit off education should even be in the field. I mean, how do you challenge that? I know many entrepreneurs do what they do, proud of the service they're offering, the humanitarian goal, and profit is just an indicator that you're serving the consumer, otherwise they wouldn't part with that money to start with. And yet if you're not in business, I suppose, particularly if you just come from one perspective in public service, it might be difficult to see. I mean, how do you respond to people who say education should be left to people who are not in it to make a profit, for example, or any business, any sector for that matter?
You know, the education space is quite contentious because it's always been perceived as a social service and therefore shouldn't be serviced in a capital environment. But if we look at how those traditional systems have failed, we can't just leave it to social services to solve them. And ultimately the most scalable solutions have been those that have been profitable because they can get to millions and billions of people. So it's imperative to me that we apply market principles to this market. Otherwise, we're never going to get to those scalable solutions. Particularly if we look at how we use technology, it's impossible to produce that world-class software and bring in world-class people unless there's a capital mechanism in play. And people who are against that sort of condemn Africa, in my mind, to the traditional way of learning, because it's incredibly hard to innovate without the capital mechanism incentives that need to exist for a business to really scale and reach millions of people. I also feel that as an entrepreneur, by definition, you're already having a social impact. You employ people, you pay taxes, and you meet a market need that people are prepared to pay for. There's no stronger indication of service than someone parting with their money. And keeping it as an NGO or a social service, you never really get that market feedback that you're actually delivering anything. And if an education service can survive a capital market, there is no stronger indication that it is doing what it needs to do. Because if it wasn't, no one would pay and it would die anyway. Whereas with an NGO, you can keep doing whatever you were doing because the donors feel good about putting in the money, but you've got no idea that you've been effective. And I think it's really helpful to be able to put those socially minded services into those kind of capital frameworks to drive the efficiency that we need to drive to actually be able to change the trajectory of how we develop people.
Amazing. And I'm going to ask this question because I can. The sphere of government I serve in, the local government, doesn't have a mandate on education. So in terms of, for those who do have a mandate on policy, what would be one or two or a few key policy reforms that you think could unlock the power of what you're proposing to do what, cellular communications did for Africa, but in the education field?
Sure, that's a tough one because I've struggled to engage a lot with public sector entities on this. But the most important thing, I think, is to shift that mindset that education, you can't be engaging private players who are going to be making a profit in the education sector, because you limit yourself to solutions that are not necessarily provided at the best or highest level that can be available in the world today. And we can't afford that kind of fallback when we're looking at the situation we need to address. The other big thing I would say is that too often, and we've seen a lot of big education technology projects deploying big plasma screens and smart boards and one laptop per child and things like that. And often they are sort of more political expediency campaigns rather than have you really identified what the learning and educational challenges are and therefore identify the technology that will work in that place, as opposed to what's a flashy thing that will get lots of coverage and show a big budget expenditure. And that happens quite a lot. Just putting a smart device in a room full of children doesn't necessarily make them smarter unless you've actually determined and designed the learning experience that those people are going to have on that device. It's still completely useless. And that's what we're missing. It's not the device necessarily. These learning experiences, the way in which you teach people on digital devices, these things still need to be developed. Yes, we've come some way, but we actually still need to figure out how people learn best on digital interfaces. So there needs to be a huge R&D expenditure, I think, and that's the Americans, the Europeans are under no incentive to figure these things out on mobile platforms. They've got high broadband and computers anyway. And unless the R&D, I think, comes from developing countries, we're not going to create those new learning experiences on mobile devices that really transform how we can learn. So I would love to see more of that happening, an acknowledgement that we don't know all aspects of learning on digital and that we do need to do a great deal more investment there. And then just general more openness in how you interact with private sector players in the space, to actually consider commercial solutions within education environments. Just because it has a price tag on it doesn't mean that it's prohibitive necessarily, because you could spend all this money on these free or open source tools or something like that, but if you haven't figured out how to package it really well, you're still going to waste the money. So given that you're going to make a major expenditure anyway, I think all solutions should be considered and not to the exclusion of commercial providers.
Sure. Excellent. Ashley Rappelang, thanks very much. I'm going to open up to the floor now because I think there's been a lot to consider, both in terms of the implications of your businesses and business models for public policy, but for those who are out there trying to do what you do and significantly change our trajectory in sectors and for the country as a whole. So we have a first question coming through. Just a quick introduction and straight to the question.
Gordon. Yesterday, or was it this morning, we heard that a quarter of the schools are not teaching maths at grades 9, 10 and 11. There must be some way that we can interact using the kind of technology you're talking about to have one teacher now spread over a far wider capacity. Would you like to talk to that point?
Sure, gladly. I think we can easily solve the issue of how to distribute the teachers' lectures or presentations and things, either maybe streaming it from a central top school to lots of schools and things. And I think lots of solutions are coming up in that way, but we often fall short and stop there. It's not just the delivery of content that actually needs to be addressed. I believe that the most effective thing that you need to do in learning any kind of fact-based or process-based knowledge is an opportunity to reinforce and consolidate knowledge, and that's really how you overcome the forgetting curve, an opportunity to practice, get immediate feedback, and retain that knowledge in longer term. And often we stop in our concept of e-learning at videos and digital textbooks and just getting it out there, but not thinking an opportunity of how is someone going to entrench this knowledge. So I would say definitely distributing the actual lectures and classroom sessions that way, but making sure that we have tools. For example, we focus a lot on tools that support sort of personalized learning. A learner can go through linear algebra week 3 and it asks them various questions and tracks what they're struggling with and automatically brings them back to the questions they're struggling with until they demonstrate consistent accuracy, gives them corrective feedback. And that kind of, they also call it rapid assessment or mobile learning. That kind of learning is actually really critical to entrench knowledge and not just present it to learners. There's actually been quite a lot of research in the US about how that is one of the most effective ways to improve learning outcomes, as opposed to more teachers or more videos. It's an opportunity to close the feedback loop. Do I know what I don't know, and can I keep working on it? Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. Thank you, Gordon. Yes, we have one at the back.
Hi, good day. My name is Nadia. I'm from the city of Cape Town, Department of Economic Development. And as a city, we spend a lot of time developing entrepreneurs and supporting entrepreneurs. And so I guess my question is for Ashley. Just do you think that your own experience, was your entrepreneurial quality something that was inherent in you, was something that you grew up with, that you were brought up with? Because we have this debate all the time. Can you develop entrepreneurs? Is it something that people naturally have? Is there something we're missing?
Yeah.
Or do you think there are qualities that even if you've never run a business or you've never been exposed, is this something that can be developed?
Yeah.
And should we be supporting and spending our money and our efforts in that field?
Yes, my opinion is you need to know your strengths and your weaknesses. Now, you can be an introvert or you can be an extrovert, but still be an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurship is not about you doing it by yourself, but it's you executing an idea and getting a team together. So I think the important part is to know you as a person. Are you the type of person who can actually stand and be the face of the company? If not, you can be an entrepreneur behind the scenes and have a marketing director. And I think that is the important part. Everybody, the youth that I spoke to, think that an entrepreneur must do everything. And that's a mistake. I mean, myself, I know I'm a scientist and I love to market. That's my strengths. My weakness is accounting. I leave that to the accountant. So I think that is the focus. And how can I execute my idea and get the right team together? Also knowing your market. If you're really serious about entrepreneurship, you need to know how to compete and how to be unique. So I think anybody can be developed into an entrepreneur. It depends on their strengths and their weaknesses and those willing to take the risk.
Can I just say that Nadia from the city of Cape Town is one of those rare good souls who could be anywhere at the top in the private sector, and she works with us in economic development and heads the rollout of all our one-stop shop programs across the community. So do speak to Nadia if you're watching, or of course if you're here with us. Key individual. Thanks so much, Nadia. Seriously, thank you. I see a lot of nods and throughout on all sorts of issues and many of the comments made. Michael.
Hold on.
Hi, my name is Michael. I actually work on a project called Entrepreneurs in Public Policy, which gets entrepreneurs involved in the public policy discussion. Rapalang, just a question. In terms of South Africa's schooling system, often in terms of the solution, people say like more money spent. And I mean, as far as I'm aware, education is one of the biggest one of the biggest areas which national government spends. If you had to change if there was one issue within sort of national government education that you had to change, or you think needs changing, what would it be?
It's a tough question because there's no silver bullet for all of the educational challenges. South Africa does spend the most per capita on children in school, but we have the least to show for it. And there's so many factors around it, a lot of those being socioeconomic, the fact that if you are born into a certain group in society, you're almost guaranteed a better access to education already. But there are aspects of it that are derived from the actual education system. And I suppose the main thing I'll say is that you need a shift away from time-based learning to competency-based learning. So right now we're happy enough to, as long as we clock a certain number of hours of bums on seats listening to a certain topic, you are considered to have gone through. And it's not actually, and that's just more a measurement of time. And the real shift is to go more to competency-based learning, that you keep learning and you build mastery, and that is when you're finished. So because of all the, I suppose, the pressures teachers are under and how the education system has evolved, we are much more concerned of checking the box that time has been spent on why, but not actually sort of building the grit and the perseverance in learners to actually master knowledge and not just go through it. And that's a major paradigm shift that I think affects everything in how the education system is structured. So moving to a competency-based system where you're pushed to master something before you go on to something else is actually the basis of what's missing, I think.
Thank you.
Gareth, if you don't mind, can I actually come
join
you on the
us.
couch? What I have is, I have a topic that I would like us to discuss. And really what it is that it comes out of the work we've been doing in MEDO with global benchmarking in terms of how can we really assist entrepreneurs and small businesses to become part of the mainstream. And I guess maybe it's a question for both of you, but I'd like to actually start off with Ashley. Let me also just contextualize it a little. Is that we're finding that a lot of Japanese and US-based large corporates are engaging small businesses in their supply chain because they feel that the innovation and the capacity for innovation is going to come from those small businesses, because they're at the point where, being a big business, they have optimized all their processes and they've got continuous improvement processes, and they keep on trying to take costs out of the business. And what that does is that kind of stifles innovation. So what have you found being in your business as a scientist, developing products, I guess, for a medical care industry? How have you felt that you've been able to bring that innovation through that maybe that pharmaceutical company you supported, you couldn't actually innovate themselves? If you just want to enlighten us on that.
Yeah, for me, it's not about reinventing the wheel. So is to know exactly what is out there already. And I've aligned myself with the University of the Western Cape, and I looked at the research they're doing there, because a lot of the research being done at universities are being published. So there's a matter of technology transfer. And I looked at proteins. We use a lot of proteins in our technology, and to piggyback off innovation to convert it into a product. So that is what I focused on. Also, the size of the organization is quite important. What I have is, I've got in my laboratory, I've got a PhD student, but I also have a non-PhD, somebody that was just finished matric. Now, what that does is open up the box, or the concept of out-of-the-box thinking, lateral thinking. Sometimes being too technical, you have tunnel vision. So when you do research, I believe if you have the skill set and the educational qualifications, you might not see what a matriculant sees in the research that you're doing. Sometimes it's a matter of adding the cool drink to water, and we tend to think, what is the molecules in that? So innovation, that is how I promote innovation in our organization, is to have skilled and unskilled work together. And the unskilled needs to do something, and we will explain what he done afterwards when you get a result. So it's a shotgun approach. It's about developing intellectual property via the shotgun approach.
Okay, a little bit learning by mistakes, like how penicillin was developed.
That's it, yes.
And yes, so would you also like to make a contribution regarding that?
Sure, I think he's got some excellent techniques there. The only other thing I would add is that I think the most important way to be innovative is to actually tap into the instincts that you have around you. A lot of the time we are able to observe when things are not working, but most of us assume that it's just the way it is, and it can't be changed. And it's actually the things that are very surface level where the most innovation can happen. So it's much more of a mindset shift that it doesn't have to be this way. This thing that irritates you, this thing that you keep looking at, instead of ignoring it, those are actually the signs to look deeper. And I think encouraging that kind of culture and that kind of self-awareness of yourself, that you keep thinking about this thing, you keep being irritated by this thing, listen to those signposts. There's something that you can fix there.
Yes, and what it does, that actually reminds me of the anecdote of Steve Jobs. They developed the iPod, and one day he arrived for a meeting at the Apple headquarters, and he threw his mobile phone down on the table, and it shattered into pieces, and he said, I just want to know why I hate this thing so much. It's just so user-friendly. We've got to do something about this. And as you say, it's really irritating, and for a very long time we were putting up with things because we thought, well, we have to put up with it because that's the way this thing works, instead of looking at it differently. So, Garreth, yes, I'm handing back to you now to conclude, because
sure.
I just wanted to bring through the innovation piece on that.
Absolutely. No, thanks, Judy. And I know a lot of your focus is on that whole realm of innovation. I mean, it's often a broad term and used quite widely. I have to ask, because we often hear the term in government and in the public sector, but is there a one-sentence capture of the word innovation so that not any new idea, even without merit, gets called innovation and is put on a pedestal? Do you have something that helps us narrow it down to quality?
I guess for me, innovation has always been about solving a problem. And if it's a problem that you are really aware of and you are honest enough to yourself about, you'll realize that a lot of people are having the same problem.
Sure.
So I've never thought of it as some scientific process.
Right.
I keep having this problem. Why do I keep having this problem? And let's fix it. So the problem solution thing is very important, and the more intimately you understand the problem, the better your insights as to how you can solve it. So that's why it's always more valuable to solve things that you've experienced over years. The insights that you have is much better than anyone that would have if they looked at it from an academic perspective.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's what I think.
Yeah, I think it's a product or a service which adds more value than existing platforms.
Right.
So in that sense, you don't have to be disruptive.
Right.
You can innovate by improving a process.
Sure.
Yeah, and it's that intellectual property whereby you add value to existing platform.
Right.
That is what I would say is innovation.
Fantastic. Well, just in closing, I have to remark, having spoken to each of these two individuals and being fortunate to meet many of our top entrepreneurs in South Africa personally, one thing that struck me, and when I think about public opinion, is the degree to which the entrepreneurs are humble and really about solving problems. And I think very often there's a view out there that entrepreneurship equals the worst of capitalism and money making, when really it's about solving major problems, and doing so where the profit motive gives you a feedback on, am I solving it or am I not solving it, and it's black or white. And there's power in that. What keeps you grounded? Because I mean, you watch CNN and there's a documentary just about you. Actually, you know, Rapelang, you don't do the fancy cars and all of that. You go back, you freely give of your time to teach people in many communities that we work in. I think I've seen you in Kailicho, Philippi. What is it? Is there something about failure when you're a true entrepreneur that keeps you grounded and keeps you humble? Because it's clearly not Wolf of Wall Street stuff. It's about service fundamentally.
Sure. Yeah, go for it.
I think it's about where you are at now. For me, it's about the future value. Where do I want to be one day? So am I really, am I creating a legacy?
Sure.
Potentially. But I am where I want to be? Not yet. So it's about the future value. And that keeps me grounded now. Right. Obviously, you need to be grounded when you're there. Now, that is when you generate enough profits to reinvest back into the community.
Right.
And that will keep you grounded as well. So I think it's a phase in your life where you are. You have to be confident, of course.
Sure.
To be able to be an entrepreneur, and you have to go out there and believe that you can do this.
Right.
But being grounded is a matter of not getting ahead of yourself.
Got you. Fantastic. Rapelang.
I think I stay grounded by really appreciating how fluid life is and how things can flip so incredibly fast. You can, especially on the entrepreneurial roller coaster, it's an amazing day, and within a few hours it's the worst day. And you can't sort of stay on that roller coaster. You've got to get off it. And the same thing with sort of broader life. I just really appreciate that the person I am chatting to now, they might be starting their business, but they could easily surpass me tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing permanent in the world. Everything shifts, everything passes. So to truly believe that you are made here, now, and forevermore is actually a very flawed concept. Life is just too fluid to think that you've gotten it all and figured it out. So.
Fantastic. Well, Rapelang, Ashley, thank you so much, and thank you, Judy and MEDO. And really, the role that you two play specifically in our society as role models and as drivers of growth. You take the risks other people aren't willing to take. You put in the hard work. I know there's a lot behind your stories, but you persist. And I think thank you very much. And from all of us, we look forward to, I think, at least an hour, I believe, we have of network and engagement for those here who want to connect with you personally. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank
Great.
you, Garreth.
Thank you.
Thank you.